Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Oliver Thurston. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Savills, both in person and I think online as well. We have some people joining in the States, which is fantastic. We're here this evening to celebrate collaboration between the London life science market and Builds Bio, which is a not-for-profit group that aims to bring together the life science community in the US and elsewhere, and we'll talk more about that shortly. And specifically this evening to present a focused research study into the emerging life science ecosystems in New York and London. And I think really to start a dialogue on this. My background, my day job here in London at Savills is commercial development, and with that, the development of life science real estate in London, the Golden Triangle, and we work in that capacity with investors, public and private institutional clients in and around the key emerging clusters. So White City, King's Cross, Whitechapel, London Bridge, etc. And everyone's looking to unlock value, commercial, social, academic in the sector. Not surprisingly, there's been much focus on Cambridge, Massachusetts, Greater Boston, as we all know. And as impressive as those markets clearly are, personally, I think it's really interesting to consider the story in New York. Principally, the parallels between London and New York at a city level are clear in terms of scale, profile, the established depth of the real estate market. And perhaps not surprisingly, in both cases, in terms of life science, both initially have been relatively slow off the mark. So what have those challenges been? Where have there been opportunities? Is the landscape changing? And if so, how and why? And from our point of view in London, what lessons can we take from the New York experience? And we're very privileged to have people in the room far better placed than I am to address those questions, and we'll come to that shortly. First up, and to present the research that sits behind the event, we're very lucky to have in the room Nancy Kelly. Nancy, a lawyer by background, is a leading light of the New York and indeed I think the US life science scene. I'm not going to begin to do justice to her mighty CV, but suffice it to say she is a nationally recognised executive with 20 years of experience across the healthcare, life science and research fields. As an example, Nancy was the founding executive director of the New York Genome Center and a lead in the development of what was called the East River Science Park, which, if you've been out to New York, is now known as the Alexandria Life Science Center in Manhattan. So Nancy will talk to what I think you'll agree is an impressive piece of research that she has spearheaded. And then in terms of running order, I'll pass over to Ryan to pick up the mantle and the fireside chat. You can imagine, nice fire here, and introductions to Sir Robert and Andy as well. Then afterwards, please do stay for drinks and further discussion outside. Nancy.
Thanks so much, Oliver, and thank you, Ryan, and all of the sponsors tonight for having us, for calling a year and a half ago and saying, we want to come to New York City and we're interested, but our event just fell apart. Would you please organize something for us? Never thought we'd be standing here tonight, and we've got about 114 people registered in person and another 58 online, including people that are in the United States because we're live streaming this tonight. So very, very exciting. This whole endeavor basically prompted, if this is going to work, no. There we go. This basically prompted a 3-day visit last June for about 15 executives from the life science market in the UK to come to the United States, New York specifically, and for a 3-day trip. And we basically organized a study tour which introduced them to public officials, local development officials, financial folks, developers, engineers, architects, scientists, companies, all of the different things that kind of make up the life science ecosystem. And here's the group touring one of the buildings in New York City. This is a ground up building, the Tasty building at the Manhattanville Factory District. And they were able to basically meet and talk to all of the leaders in the emerging life science sector. Thank you again to our sponsors, to Savills, for having us tonight. Really appreciate that. Couldn't have done this without them. And then just wanted to start out by beginning with what drives all of this, right? Why do we do any of this? And so this is a picture of Schermerhorn Hall at Columbia, the Morningside campus. It was built in 1897. And it's very famous because it held the fly room for evolutionary biologist Thomas Hunt, who later went on to win the Nobel Prize for his discovery of the role of genes in inheritance, for which he was studying the Drosophila fly. And that happened here. And this is really where New York life science real estate all began. This is another example on Rockefeller University, Flexner Hall. And scientists basically have been studying the structure of nucleic acids for years and years, and all about DNA and RNA here. It is now on the National Historic Chemical Landmarks program from the American Chemical Society. So these are two early pictures. And if you look at this Flexner Hall, you're going to see Rockefeller University later on and the transformation of that campus in the last 100 years, which is actually quite remarkable. So how did this all get started? New York has the largest aggregation of academic medical centers and research institutions in the world. And they really are the very highest quality. The medical care in New York is unrivaled. But what was not happening was the local commercialization of technologies that were coming out of the universities. And that was not surprising, because in the old pharma model, where pharma basically went around licensing technology from academia and negotiating that directly with the academic institutions, in the early 2000s, that started changing with the pharmaceutical decentralization and with them moving campuses closer to where the innovation was actually happening, next to the scientists at universities like Harvard and MIT, which were prolific in spinning out small startup companies from the early 1980s on. This really wasn't happening in New York for a long time. And so the market there really started to develop in the late 90s, when Columbia University opened the Audubon Business and Technology Center, which was New York City's first incubator. And that was followed a little bit later by SUNY Downstate, who opened their own incubator in Brooklyn. And the Structural Biology Center opened in Harlem. There were, some one-offs. The city's flagship project was the East River Science Park, which was a 3.5-acre parcel of land. When I first visited, it had a laundry building that was abandoned, that was filled with asbestos. It had a surface parking lot, and it had the tents that housed the remains of unidentified 9/11 victims. That was what was on the parcel of land that later became the East River Science Park and the Alexandria Center for Life Sciences. So redeveloping that park into a privately held commercial lab park was the first and biggest initiative from New York City to really start this whole program. And later, Pfizer located there, Roche came, NYU located there, a lot of different startup companies started there, and it became really the first commercial center for life sciences in New York City. BioBat, which was another life science incubator, was launched in the Brooklyn Army Terminal around this same time. And gradually you saw companies moving in to the Alexandria Life Sciences Center and establishing their operations and commercializing their technologies. Another, the New York Genome Center, which I founded with 11 of the largest academic centers in New York City, opened in 2013, but we were working on it in 2010 on. And so that was percolating during this time. It had 173,000 square foot real estate requirement. And so we converted the first office building in Manhattan into a life science building. And that was the first office to life science conversion in New York. Harlem Biospace was opened a short while later. And so everything kept percolating and percolating until by 2016, the New York City life sciences sector in the economy had really started to grow. And it was the fastest growing segment of the economy by that point. In 2018, which was the year that Builds Bio was formed, to bring the life science community together with the real estate community to really jumpstart additional privately held lab space in the city. That was preceded by an announcement by Mayor de Blasio at the time, basically talking about a $500 million investment in life sciences, which was really the catalyst that galvanized what happened in New York City. And then what you see as the timeline continues, things continue to accelerate from there. And a lot of investment went into new buildings, new incubators, companies started forming and going public and growing, and the growth just kept rolling on from there until where we are today. Now, what was really part of that catalyst was the mayor's 10-point program. And this is a good summary of what you need to do if you want to jumpstart a life science cluster. It has all of the different elements in it. And this was put out in the press release, which announced that first $500 million investment. It had a notion of an applied life sciences campus, which would be an anchor for the industry, $50 million to expand the R&D facilities that were already operating in New York City, $10 million for new incubators, $20 million to support early stage businesses with capital and other assistance, $7.5 million to create internships and curricula to train the workforce to come into these new companies, $300 million in tax incentives to promote the development of new facilities by the private sector, land use reform, new zoning that would allow the expansion of life science in the city, and on, new training programs and a life sciences advisory council. So that really began the whole initiative. And then a short while later, Governor Cuomo announced a $620 million initiative to further grow the life science cluster in New York City with their own set of incentive programs, $320 million in capital programs to create new space, $100 million in R&D tax credits for new companies, and $100 million in private investment that would be supplemented by venture capital and the Partnership Fund for New York City. And so the combination of these two programs together is what really drove what's happened over the last 5 years as growth has really accelerated. A short time after announcing the state program, Governor Cuomo also announced a $17 million investment in J Labs, which is an incubator run by Johnson & Johnson in the New York Genome Center building, which we had planned from the start when we outfitted that building, and which houses 30 startups today. Also 25 million for IndieBio, which is an SOSV venture which started in San Francisco, came to New York, promised to work with 20 companies a year and invest $2 million in those companies. And that program is really going strong today. Other things that happened was the city partnering with Deerfield Management, which is really a venture capital for healthcare and life science, to create the Cure, which is a very large new building that has been transformed in New York City and which houses an incubator and a lot of other assistance for growing companies and pursuing new cures. Brought in King Street Properties, another very large developer, to create InnoLabs, which has both early stage company space as well as later stage company space. The Pandemic Response Lab opened there during COVID-19. And then also the state gave $10 million for the Tasty building in the Manhattanville Factory District, which is close to the new Manhattanville Columbia campus, to start a node there. Just make sure. Alongside of this, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. Alongside of this, you cannot underestimate the importance of the philanthropic investment that was made by many of the private foundations. The Bloomberg Foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropies, Simons Foundation, the Carson Family Trust, Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. These are all science-focused foundations that invested hundreds of millions and totaling over $1 billion in institutions like the New York Genome Center, like the Cornell Technion campus that sits between Academic Alley and Long Island City, like the new climate change initiative on Governor's Island. And then venture investment followed suit. And you can really see, starting in 2018, New York was lagging in venture investment in our life science sector. But as soon as these investments from the public sector and the philanthropic sector and the private sector started ramping up, the venture capital also started ramping up as well. And it's been climbing on a year-over-year basis ever since. So the way that the industry looks now is that there is not one monolithic place called the life science cluster in New York City. It has basically developed in a number of subclusters throughout the city and the major boroughs, both in Manhattan, in Queens, Long Island City, in Brooklyn, and the Bronx. And I was in Boston for 25 years before I came to New York, and Boston evolved pretty much the same way. So there was the Longwood Medical Center, which was all around the academic centers there, and then Cambridge, started getting going around MIT Tech Square, which was really one of the first developments there. And then it branched out from there to Alewife and other places in Cambridge, and then to the suburbs. And gradually you had all of these clusters or subclusters around the city that were growing. And New York's been very similar to that. And so we call this the bioarc. This was something put together by my firm and Ennead Architects that basically shows in yellow where all of the different subclusters are, and it shows that they're all connected by transportation throughout the city, and then across into New Jersey, where development is now spilling over into Jersey City and Newark. And so on the east side corridor of Manhattan now, you have Mount Sinai, Academic Alley, where Rockefeller and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center and Weill Cornell Medical Center, they're all located there, and many more. It's the largest aggregation of academic centers in the city. Across the river to Long Island City, which is a developing hub, but directly connected to Grand Central. So it's very easy to get to, with a lot of available building stock that has good bones that can be converted into life science use. And then coming back around Kips Bay, which is where the Alexandria Center is located, and the new designated development, which I'll talk about in a minute, by the city. And then across to Brooklyn, where a very, very interesting, innovative cluster is evolving over time, with about 8 incubators that are driving the growth there. And then down to the very south, Hudson Square, where the New York Genome Center is located, and where it's helping to galvanize growth there. So these are some of the buildings that are in those different clusters that you saw. So just to point one out in particular, kind of in the middle right hand, you see Rockefeller University River Campus. That's what the campus looks like today. It's completely built out over the avenue there, and Flexner Hall is actually one of those older buildings in the front, but you can see the transformation that's taking place. InnoLabs is there, the Alexandria Center, the Bindery, which is also in Long Island City. It's another development for Alexandria. The Cure, Spark Kips Bay, which is the new development, the Plan New York Blood Center East, the Life Sciences Tower for Alexandria, the Hatch, which is Longfellow, and some of the other academic centers which are here. On the west side, you have similar, clusters developing, beginning with Hudson Square in the south, and then going up the west side, Midtown West, Manhattanville, which is in Harlem, Columbia Presbyterian, which is near where the Morningside campus is, and the Bronx Hutchinson Metro Center in the Bronx. And there's very, very exciting buildings being built in all of these places. And each of them has their own personality and their own look and feel. So these are some of the companies that are located in some of these developments, but the Hudson Research Center was the next building to get repurposed for life sciences right after New York Genome Center was finished. It houses the New York Stem Cell Foundation, which was in the Audubon Technology Center for years and years, and moved down to the Hudson Research Center, and Taconic basically revamped that building for life science space, and it's 100% full today. I have to tell you that when we were doing the New York Genome Center, we looked at over 100 properties in New York City to locate that. This was one of them. And at that point, the landlord was not acquainted with labs in a building, and didn't know, about the use, was afraid of it, and cut off negotiation midpoint because didn't want the use in their building. And now it is fully occupied health sciences and life sciences center, and Mount Sinai is one of the tenants there, as is Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And then Taconic, which just created a life science arm called Elevate Research Properties, built the West End Labs, which is one of the newest additions to the lab inventory in Manhattan. And I got to tell you, this is like one of the strongest life science buildings we have. It's amazing. And they just landed their first tenant. And so they're off to the races. And there's others in Midtown West. The two on the bottom, the Tasty building, which you saw in the opening slide, and the Mink building, which is a repurposed building across the street, are all in the Manhattan Factory District being developed by Janus Property. And then I have to mention Jersey City and Newark. They are two cities in New Jersey. And the development that is coming out of New York is spilling over here. And populating these cities with life science companies as well. And the reason is they're offering more moderately priced lab space that's been fully built out. And so you have 95 Green Street, which is being developed by Thor Equities, done a really nice job there. They have attracted a lot of companies actually out of Biobat and Brooklyn to move there as they've grown. We have the Cove, which is a development that I've been working on, which will be 3 million square feet, 1.5 million square feet of ground up life science. And you see the HACS there, which is the hard tech initiative by SOSV, which was placed in Newark because you can get between Newark and where IndieBio is located in central Manhattan very quickly by train. And so the one good thing about New York is all of these subclusters are linked with great transportation. So where are we today? 3 or 4 years after the mayor first announced the 500 million, he announced another 500 million. The new mayor, Adams, has also devoted a great deal of resources to this, to the point where there's $1.1 billion of total investment by the city in these areas, 12 active incubators, 3.5 million square feet that's been built out. By the way, none of this was available in 2018 when Builds Bio started. So that's how fast this has been going. And life science employment is growing. The wages are really good, much better than in other industries. And the goal is 1,000 R&D companies, 40,000 jobs, and 10 million square feet in life science real estate over the next, by 2030, I think, which will bring an economic impact of $82 billion in. So this is the most recent initiative that the EDC and the mayor and the governor have basically just announced. It's called Sparks Kips Bay. It's just down the street from the Alexandria Life Sciences Center. It's across from the old public health building, which is another 1 million square feet that's being repurposed by Taconic and Divco West. The city and state are going to put $1.6 billion in investment here. They expect a $42 billion economic impact just from this project alone. There's 1 acre that will be established. You can see it there on the picture. You'll actually be able to take a ferry to this development, walk across the highway and get to the development where there will be a park and some open space. The interesting part about this is that the building on the right will house an education campus for healthcare in the city. And it will have a STEM school, STEM high school. It will also, Hunter College will be there, CUNY, City University of New York, the Manhattan Community College will be there. So it will be the collaboration of a lot of educational institutions that are training all kinds of people to work in this industry. And really having an impact on the people that live in New York City. And then the building next to it will be a 1 million square feet that will be restored by or built by a developer and will house a new anchor tenant that can be a translational research institute, an innovation campus, some kind of philanthropy-led research entity, an innovation hub. And the EDC is going to put $100 million into that piece of the development alone. So the investment is continuing and the state is working on this as well. This is something that's very exciting because if you look at the navy blue, the light blue parts of this map, those were the only spaces that were zoned as of right for life science use in Manhattan. They're basically use group 17, which is a manufacturing use group. Group 9A, which is commercial, much lighter development. It was unclear whether life science could take place in those zones. And 4 years ago, the city issued a clarifying memorandum, which nobody wanted to rely on. And so now the city has undertaken a comprehensive rezoning to double the amount of space that life science laboratories can be located in. And so all of the navy blue and all of the light blue now are where labs can be put in the city. And then there's been some big recent wins. The Chan Zuckerberg Biohub in New York was just announced, which will be $300 million. Chan Zuckerberg will put in a couple $100 million. The state and the city are contributing, and that will be a collaboration between Columbia, Rockefeller, and Yale. So you can see it's been kind of going up like a rocket for the last 5 years. Lessons learned, I mean, there's so many lessons. The research report and the press release, which went out, are now on our website and can be downloaded. So you can read the full report. You can get more details on any of this. But I think the most important thing is in 2018, there were no lab space for life science companies to go into. They literally had to leave the city once they spun out of the academic institutions. And so building that space was really important, both in terms of the kind of nonprofit lab space you see at the New York Genome Center, the for-profit laboratories you see at InnoLabs, the incubators that you see at BioLabs at NYU Langone. All of this needed to be built. And these are some of the projects that exist today with city and state funding. We mentioned most of them here. And the startup space was critical. I mean, having 10 to 12 incubators that can feed the development of new companies, 25 to 30 companies graduating out of them every year and moving into this space is really a commercialization engine that's driving all of the growth. And technology isn't uniform. So you can think about life sciences as the development of therapeutics, or you could think about it as synthetic biology, where scientists are not just reading the genome, they're writing it. And it's opening up markets in new materials, in energy and food, all of the new markets that you've been hearing about in terms of products built in the laboratory. And I firmly believe that in 50 years, every product we use will have a biological component to it. New York is a hotbed of this technology today. But it's not just that, it's robotics and medical devices and digital health and all of the technologies that go along with big tech, data, and artificial intelligence, and building the data centers that you need, and now climate solutions. And although there were national players that did come to New York, like Alexandria, like King Street Properties, like Longfellow, it's really been some local leaders that have made a big difference. So Taconic Partners and Matt Ware in particular, who's been the leader for their life science sector, they had information about tech. They were good at managing tech buildings, and they decided to put that expertise to work in converting life science buildings. And they've been very, very successful at that. Janus Properties is doing Manhattanville Factory District. Scott Metzner, Janus is also a sponsor of this report, and his partner, Jerry Salama, have been very successful up there at both converting old buildings like the Mink building, where it actually used to be a Furrier storage facility, and building ground up like the Tasty building, which you saw. And then the internships and training programs, which are available in New York, are really allowing the economic benefits of this industry to be shared with many in all of the communities, and Sparks Kit Bay project, where their focus on education and job training, will only accelerate that. So that's the story in New York, and I'm really excited to be here tonight to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I just first want to say I'm glad you guys got your planning reform sorted, because over here, no problem. My name is Ryan Matenchik. I run a business called Galileo Labs. At the end of last year, we were very happy to partner up with developer Lipton Rogers and also funding partner Cadence, which is not Cadence, it's Cadence. And we're running hard on it with a new hire coming in April, and then another one later in the year. Before meeting Nancy, we were organizing a trip to New York with the Urban Land Institute, which wasn't, let's just say, didn't quite come to fruition. But Nancy stepped up and made effectively the trip happen, and the research on the back of it, and we're incredibly grateful for that. Thank you, Nancy, for doing that for us. And also for the sponsors and Savills and everyone in the room, thank you for passing up the opportunity for sunshine and extra vitamin D to be here tonight. Thank you. This evening, I don't want to talk too much because we have some excellent panelists. We don't quite have the fire. I don't know what happened, Savills, there was supposed to be a fire, but we'll talk about that after, I guess. But I have the privilege of leading a panel discussion with two distinguished scientists and a clever lawyer. So I'm not sure if this is the start of a very good joke, or rather a wonderful discussion about life sciences with actual scientists in the room, understanding the challenges they're facing and potentially looking at what happened in New York and how we can bring that about. But first, I'm going to do some introductions. I've cut these down because it would have taken the rest of the time. So Professor Sir Robert Lechler, let me start there. Dr. Robert started out as a clinical academic who made important scientific contributions to the field of transplantation, both nationally and internationally. In 2023, he was awarded the prestigious Thomas E. Starles Prize in Surgery and Immunology, which acknowledged his outstanding national and international leadership and the significant contribution he made in the fields of organ transplantation and immunology. Robert is a senior vice president at King's College London, who founded and led King's Health Partners Academic Health Science Centre. There's a lot in there. And he was there for over 15 years. During this time, Robert was also the president of the UK Academy of Medical Sciences between 2015 and 2020. He was also a founding board member of MedCity here in London, a board member of the Francis Crick Institute, and a trustee of the British Heart Foundation. He is now happily retired and taking time off. Oh, sorry. No, he is now leading a multi-portfolio career with interests in co-chairing the board of SC1 London Life Sciences Innovation Clusters, alongside board positions in two leading London therapeutics companies. He is also the chair of the External Advisory Board for Birmingham Health Partners and chairing the board of directors of the London Mozart Players. Importantly, and I think we'll come on to this here in a bit, he is a very strong advocate of the academic health science center model of university healthcare partnerships. Second, we have Dr. Andy Williams. Andy started his career as a scientist, obtaining a PhD in molecular genetics. He worked with a pharma startup called AstraZeneca, which seems to be doing all right. While he was there, he was very much instrumental in the move that they did into Cambridge initially, but also very much into the beautiful new glass donut that they have on the biomedical campus. As part of his role there, he was also an active contributor to Cambridge's thinking in terms of transport, skill development, community amenity, housing, and digital strategies. He's currently the chair of the Oxcam Supercluster Board, whose board has been actively engaging the central government in support of, I'm sure we'll hear about it here in a bit, the East-West Railway policy. And he's trying to get that to help support growth across not only the region there, but also the wider UK economy. He also remains very active in Cambridge, sitting on the boards of Cambridge Ahead, Cambridge Network, and the business board representing Greater Cambridge Partnership. So what a great panel we have today. So the first thing I want to do is hand over to Robert. Sorry, Professor Sir Robert. That's right, Robert, okay. To do a quick response actually to what he saw in the presentation from Nancy, and then I've got a few questions for the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are we going to be slightly relaxed about the
Yes,
finish
great.
time? Okay, brilliant. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate. The first thing to say is congratulations, Nancy. I mean, that's a phenomenal story. You catalyzed some remarkable things, and I think you're to be heartily congratulated. I want to make brief remarks. I promise they'll be brief, and you can give me a dirty look if I'm going on too long, under 4 quick headings. The first one, I just want to emphasize the context in which this stuff is happening. Just in case anybody in the room is in any doubt, we have the privilege of living through the most exciting time in biomedical and life science in history. It's phenomenal. The rate of discovery is so exciting, so much so that we should be aspiring in the next decade to delivering curative therapies for diseases. Now, you may not know this, but medicine doesn't cure very much right now. Bacterial infections with antibiotics, gallstones with a cholecystectomy, but most of the time we're slowing down disease progression, we're palliating, we're helping people live with their long-term conditions. That's going to change. And 3 areas I would pick out for you, there are many others probably, but I would pick out genomics leading to gene editing and gene therapy, for single gene disorders in particular, immune manipulation, changing the face of cancer, autoimmunity and transplantation, and regenerative medicine, allowing tissues to repair themselves. Those things will change the face of what are currently long-term conditions. Now, the reason I emphasize that is why this is what we do. To realize that potential and to do justice to it and to deliver that in terms of patient benefit and population health gain, we have to catalyze 3 sectors working ever more closely, and that's academia, healthcare, and life sciences industries. And that's what all this cluster stuff is about, and that's what energizes me, and I'm sure you knew that, but I just thought I'd emphasize that. That's context. So turning then to London, a little bit of compare and contrast with the awesome story we've heard from Nancy. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Oxbridge, but Andy will do justice to that, so I'm not going to bother to cover it. So London has an enormous suite of assets. So if I take the 3 sectors that I just mentioned very briefly, according to the Times Higher International League table, we've got 3 of the world's top 10 universities for clinical and health research. We've got fabulous research institutes. So the Francis Crick Institute, brilliant. The Turing Institute, Artificial Intelligence, brilliant. Institute of Cancer Research, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and so I could go on. So academically wonderful, 33 Nobel Prize winners. I bet you can beat that, but I don't know the number from New York. So I'm not going to get into a competition, but academically, London has lots of strengths. Turning to healthcare, 39 hospitals, the biggest concentration of specialist services of any European city. One thing that we have that I think is an advantage over New York is we have a single healthcare system. So they're all looked after by a single healthcare system, and we are getting ever closer to having a single data platform, a federated data platform, a secure environment that you can access data on our population of 10 million people if you want to do health research. That's a population to die for, served by a single healthcare system. And then finally, industry, something like 1,200 life sciences companies located in London. A lot of the major pharma companies have got a footprint and an R&D presence in London. And as Nancy drew out, it's not just pharma and biotech, it's also medtech, hugely important, and digital tech also, again, hugely important. Layered on top of all that, of course, we've got a big presence from Google, as do you, Microsoft, Benevolent AI, and so on. So that's my second point. Third point is, how's the London journey looking? How's it been and where's it going? So I started talking about some of this stuff about 15 years ago, and I'll tell you in a moment what triggered me to do so. And I was saying, look, London should be, one of the leading biomedical capitals of the world. And people wondered what I was smoking, because they said, look, there's no brownfield sites in London. It's all too expensive. No one wants to work there. The salaries, go to Addenbrooke's. Brownfield sites are plenty. How wrong they were. So what's happened in London over the last 15 years is quite remarkable. I wouldn't say it matches what we've heard, but London is a cluster of clusters. So if you drive out on the A40, Imperial West, White City, is phenomenal. King's Cross, the Knowledge Quarter, growing very fast around the Crick. SC1, the cluster that I lead in central southeast London. Canary Wharf, Whitechapel, Barts Life Sciences, repurposing the whole of the old London Hospital. The Olympic Park out east in UCL, and then the London Cancer Hub down in Sutton. That's 7 clusters, which are essentially making up London's cluster. And that's an extraordinary journey. Looking ahead, the even more exciting thing is that I'm told there are 5 million square feet of space designated for life science expansion in London. 2.7 million of those square feet are under construction, and I'm sure you guys are doing that. 2.6 million has planning permission, but has yet to get the funding. So we're in a very exciting place. And then my final and fourth point is London and New York. Now, what triggered me to get excited about all this stuff was a visit to New York a little over 15 years ago, when I met a guy called Ellis Rubinstein, who at that time was the president of the New York Academy of Sciences. Very charismatic, driven, energetic man. And I could see he was beginning to get New York to come together, both academically and healthcare and industry. And I came back saying, look, we've got to do something in London, because London at that point had an outstanding history of being less than the sum of its parts, because we just in an adolescent manner competed at the expense of collaboration. And so it's begun to happen. And one catalyst for that has been the formation of MedCity, which is meant to be bringing life sciences industries to help them navigate the London complex environment. So I think London and New York have got a huge amount in common, very similar populations, very similar estates challenges, very similar opportunities. And I think we're both committed to addressing health inequality. I mean, health inequality is the biggest scandal, I think, that we confront, exaggerated by the pandemic. And I think if we get this right, then we can do a lot. What we would like is to borrow the wallet of de Blasio and to get your philanthropists to come in it. Now, of course, Bloomberg has got a mansion in Holland Park. So there is hope. Hope springs eternal. But that's my summary.
No, great, thank you. So the first question I have for you, and this is something that I observed when I was in New York, and Nancy and I have talked about this at length, but it was really the universities in New York that kind of led the charge of creating this kind of innovation cluster, largely on the back of trying to attract talent. So the path of commercialization was something that attracted top talent to these universities. Is that something you're seeing over here as well in London?
I mean, the short answer is yes. The short answer is yes. I would say that universities are absolutely critical in catalyzing a lot of what I just described has happened in these sort of 7 sub-clusters. In partnership in some instances with the healthcare partners also, and in the cluster that I'm directly involved with, SC1, the hospital has a huge charity, which is a big landowner, and they've chosen to make some of the plots of land available for life sciences development. So it's I'd say most of the impetus comes from the universities, but there are other partners who come in and add an extra heft.
Thank you. This one's for Andy. So obviously you need your chance to speak here. I think it's fair. One of the question I have for you is largely, what's happening in London. There's kind of, it does feel it's a little bit behind the other clusters, specifically Cambridge. But is what is happening in London, is that beneficial to Cambridge and Oxford? Is that changing the way Cambridge and Oxford are forming? Or do you think that's going to change the way going forward? Or what impact is that actually having in your view?
Well, there's always been strong links between London, Oxford and Cambridge. It's less than an hour to get to either Oxford or Cambridge. As I'm sorry, we're talking, so 30 years ago, as I started my career at Cambridge Analytical Technology, one of the first things I was told, I was sent down to London to talk to Tiny Maney about rheumatoid arthritis. So any idea that London doesn't have centres of excellence is just fallacy. I guess the short answer to your question is it changing Oxford and Cambridge. At the moment, no, because at the moment demand is far exceeding supply. And so until we resolve that one, we've got to be up with the problem. So Oxford and Cambridge are both very successful. They generate huge amounts of intellectual property, which is the gold dust of the next generation of activity. So no activity about London at the moment. I think central government have spotted both Oxford and Cambridge are constrained. So from a Cambridge perspective, they're going to try and triple the size of the city. Now some will be supportive of that and some not so supportive because Cambridge is what it is because of the size it is. So there's mixed views on what they should spend. But what I talked about earlier was connecting Oxford and Cambridge more closely. So the quickest way to get from Oxford to Cambridge now is to come to London, get a train out to London, and then get a train out to Oxford. So having a train line between Oxford and Cambridge is a big difference linking those two cities, creates two global centres of excellence, and we're hoping to energise the areas in between. We also have that critical mass in either Oxford or Cambridge. Now that's not just my view, that is the view of the larger organisations in Oxford and Cambridge. And what they're saying is we need critical mass. Eventually that critical mass needs to involve London as well. So I'm really excited about the opportunities that London provides for us. What I'm seeing might be changing a little bit just over the last 5 to 10 years is the way that the commercial sector is interfacing with the life science sector. So we've actually heard earlier some interesting life science sector thinking about its place-based strategies. 30, 40 years ago, they were based next to rivers because they were busy making antibiotics. And the science group out there, not the universities completely separate. This idea that the industry is now considering its location, and it's multifaceted to that location. It's not always just about next to the universities. There may be lifestyle choices, all sorts of things going on. I think that's really important. And so what I'm seeing, it may not be a response to London, but it's certainly a response to competition. It's the commercial sector having a much better understanding of their value proposition. What is it they're interested in? How is that going to apply to particular life sciences, and understanding where you fit within that sector is going to be really important moving forward.
Makes sense. Thank you. So Nancy, we're staring here with very envious eyes of the government and the funding that they stuck into New York. And was there what was the catalyst that got the city and the state to effectively make this investment? Is there a secret playbook that we can borrow that we can hand to our mayor? Is there? But I'm really curious because it kind of seems out of the blue. And was there any risk that they thought they would be picking effectively one industry over another? Because they could have put the money into a lot of different industries, but they chose life sciences.
Well, you have to remember that New York is the largest aggregation of top medical institutions and academic institutions in the world. And part of that is research, and part of that is healthcare delivery. But the combination represents a huge percentage of the New York economy. So I don't think they were just throwing a dart at the wall or picking an industry that they wanted to grow. And remember, early on, I had listed the initiatives that led up to that announcement. And so by 2016, the life science sector was one of the fastest growing segments in the New York economy. So, obviously encouraging that to accelerate was important. And the announcement by the mayor, I actually think it was a bold move. And it's turned out to be a great move for New York City.
I'm going to follow up after a few more questions about what they might not have gotten so right, but I'll ask you here shortly. Robert, question for you, and this is something that we noticed on the tour, but also in Boston. Is innovation, is there a cultural difference the way the UK looks at innovation, or Europe for that matter, versus the US, where entrepreneurs are champion taking these kind of risks is, a failure is a sign of the next success, whereas over here it's viewed quite differently. Is that a challenge that you think that we have over here?
Yeah, I think we do, though I think the challenge is receding. So I think the culture in the academic world is definitely changing. So what's the justification for that remark? Well, I think universities that I know, leading universities, absolutely recognise the importance of commercialisation. And it makes economic sense, apart from my point about actually the fastest route to translate discovery into patient benefit requires commercialisation and industry partners. Language that I think has just about died out in this country. If somebody left academia and went into industry, they were going to the dark side. You don't hear that sort of language used. There's much more mobility between sectors than there used to be. There's something, Nancy, I don't know, you may not be aware of this. We in the academic sector in the UK subject ourselves about once every 7 years to a research assessment called the Research Assessment Exercise. All UK universities, 131 of them, do this. It's voluntary. Well, we kind of do it to ourselves. But this assessment is important because it determines how you come out of that assessment, determines your government grant for research for the following 7 years. And that traditionally has all been based around outputs, research outputs, as you might expect. But a number of years ago, the decision was taken to measure impact. And it's now 20% of the overall score you get is impact. Now, impact means translation, and it means, turning discovery into products and drugs. So that has had another substantial effect, I think. The formation of ARIA, Advanced Research Innovation, Invention Agency, the one that was Dominic Cummings, Dominic Cummings' best legacy, ARIA. And that's, again, it's a bit like Arthur in the US. So all these things, Innovate UK, and I think that you can see a real striving to grow up a bit and realize that research doesn't just have to be ivory tower academic highfalutin stuff, it's also needs to get into translation.
And just building on that, so one of the things they always talk about is like the UK is really good at the R of the R&D, but really poor at the D. Is that going to translate into more development of the discoveries, or what's the challenge there? Why isn't this happening?
Sorry, okay, that was kind of the question that I thought you just put to me, so I've answered that question in my previous answer. But basically all I said, I think, is saying that we're getting much more serious about D. I mean, I think it's still there's catching up to do. And I think this impact agenda, Innovate UK, ARIA, commercialization, mobility between career sectors and all that stuff, it's all designed to get stronger on the D end, not just the pure R.
I can answer that question for you.
Okay, well, I've got Andy up next.
Asking a pharmaceutical person about development. So the reason we're not so good at development is mainly around funding. So scale up of organisations and ability to take things through phase 3 and onto the market. And actually you see quite a few examples of UK companies getting to phase 1, phase 2, then being acquired, and then generally speaking, them disappearing, and the large organisation continuing. So actually VC funding is in a much better state than it was several years ago, but we still have that gap between getting things to a reasonable stage of development and getting onto the market. I know that's the question you're going to ask me, but that's the answer to that question.
Thank you. The question I am going to ask you is about urbanisation and science parks. And this is something that some people have written about, I know, because I've written about it. But there is, especially around Cambridge and Oxford, there is a desire, in my view, to be very local. Clearly, a city that's 900 years old doesn't quite, fit new development in very large ways with transport networks that connect everyone efficiently. So, looking at Cambridge and Oxford, the science parks, is that something they want to grow because they have to, or is there still this desire to be very urban, or is it a combination of both?
No, so me and Ryan haven't met before, but I read his article, and I knew he was going to ask this question. I can get it changed. So you're right. I think there is historically, as you go around, the universities are right in the middle of town, and then there's a wave of science parks quite close to town, and then there's some off-town sites as well. Now that's happened over a long period of time, and I haven't done my Cambridge sell yet, so I'll do a little bit now. So you're right. People who are starting at companies want the companies to be very close to where they invested their fees and a cycle in the case of Cambridge. But because of the way it's evolved, although the university remains an important part of that innovation landscape, there are other players as well. So AstraZeneca put their global R&D headquarters actually at Addenbrooke's, right next door to a laboratory which itself has had 12 Nobel Prize winners, including the discovery of monoclonal antibodies, DNA, phage display of antibodies, which is the in vitro display, and cryo-EMs, a new way of looking at a very detailed level of microscopy. These are all things in recent times. So I guess the answer is that the way you came to solve that is the research institutes, which themselves are globally excellent. You could also look at the Sanger Centre, you could look at Harvard and Oxford. They've created an ecosystem which doesn't allow universities. But the irony of the question, of course, is that Cambridge and Oxford have both come across some brownfield sites, or shopping malls, as we used to call them. And the move in Cambridge, particularly with the constraints on planning and building at the moment, which some of you guys will know, is there's a frenzy of designating pretty much anything you can do as life science space, because that obviously increases its value before you've actually done anything with it. So we're about to go through that experiment line. Will the places, the brownfield site right in the middle of the town, become the most attractive place? Or will the ones on the edge be the most attractive place with the research institutes? Or will people still like to live out in the countryside because they can drive there? And that's why I came back to my first answer was there's different requirements for different people. There's different requirements for different stages of companies. And that's what I think the commercial sector's really got to think about. For example, if you look at AstraZeneca's announcement last week, 200 million towards R&D in Cambridge, 450 million on manufacturing in Speak. So there's a much more sophisticated understanding of how pharmaceutical industry is going to act. And that feeds down into the lower stages of the market as well. Understand your market, understand who you're going for, and make sure you're differentiated. If you're not, with all the space being created, there are going to be winners and losers.
Thanks, Andy. So Nancy, I wanted to come back to this question, and I want to open up as well to questions in the audience. So if there are some burning questions, get ready. We're going to pass the microphone around. We have time for a few questions from the audience. This is my final question for Nancy. So literally, there's tons of initiatives that they did in New York, and over the past 15 years, they've spent the better part of $2 billion, I think, investment. Are there things that worked really well and things that haven't worked out so well that we could learn some lessons from?
Well, I think you just saw all the things that worked really, really well. I think that there were initiatives that took longer than people wanted them to. Not that they were necessarily failures as you're putting them. For example, there was $150 million that was designated for investment in life science companies, and it was rolled out with a venture capital firm and some local New York funding as well. And that never really came to fruition, but it didn't really need to, because 2 years after the venture community started putting their money into New York hotels. And so you saw those bar graphs that kept growing on a year-over-year basis. So it took longer, but the investment came. And I think, there are some of the subclusters where there's some vacancy, and people are waiting for the life science companies that are percolating in the environment right now to grow up and grow into these companies. And they will. It's just taking a little bit longer than people might like. But there's no doubt that it's coming with all of the companies that are graduating and needing space right now.
Fantastic. All right, can I open it up to questions in the audience? Is there any questions out there? Yeah, just come your way.
Thank you, Paddy Pringle from Hull campus. This is for Nancy. So you mentioned the success of incubators in New York. What was the main, or were there more successful models of incubators than others? Were some publicly funded and were some privately funded?
I think there's two, the startup companies in New York fall into two categories. One is companies that raise venture capital early in large amounts, and they have the money to spend on the labs, that are in Manhattan and have a higher rental rate than other areas of the city. And real estate is less meaningful to them because they're trying to hit their therapeutic goals. And then there's another large component of the startup community in New York, which is bootstrap. And these are young scientists, for the most part, that have an idea. They're passionate about it. They're building their companies. They've raised a couple $1 million from friends and family, or maybe angel investors. Maybe they have some non-dilutive funding from the SBIR program or other NIH or Department of Defense grants. And they're trying to prove their concept before scaling up. These companies are sensitive to the price of real estate in New York City, and they need to locate where it's less expensive. So Long Island City, for example, or Brooklyn have incubators or labs that are less expensive than other parts or even Harlem, you know, the Tasty building and such. They're less expensive, and these are where these kinds of companies tend to gravitate toward. I think the majority of incubators that have been formed in the city has some public-private academic component. So it's, you know, it's that combination of public investment. So for biolabs at NYU, for example, that began with a $5 million grant from Mayor de Blasio, but NYU put in a lot themselves alongside of that, and these were for companies that had already raised venture funding. So the venture capitalists were putting in investment alongside of that. The IndieBio SOSV came in alongside the New York Empire State Development to fund that. And so I think you're seeing different models, but I think they all have some combination of this public-private academic flavor.
Any other questions in the audience? We have time for 2 more questions.
Very much. Caroline Wilson from London Borough of Islington. So I'm really inspired, Nancy, about the kind of soft infrastructure you're talking about in terms of equity, social equity, and I was interested in terms of the initial public investments that went into the internships and on the talent kind of within local communities. What's been the kind of appetite beyond that public investment, and are there lessons for us, because we're working across with Islington's working with 7 other boroughs in central London, including the SC1 boroughs, to really look at kind of how do we make this an inclusive super cluster? How do we bring this super cluster to life in London and really make it benefit the people who already live here, rather than only ever importing talent? So, you know, how do we help the health inequalities that we're talking about and those diverse communities, and make sure they're represented in those amazing jobs that you're talking about, Nancy? So any lessons you have beyond the initial phase would be really interesting.
I think that's become an increasingly important focus for the educational institutions throughout the city. So up in the Bronx, for example, Montefiore Health System and Mercy University, which are both on the Hutchinson campus, and what is going to be the expansion of that campus in the Bronx, very, very much focused on a new STEM high school that will be placed there by the city, but also developing workforce development programs, creating the internships to place people. The City College of New York has gotten raised money from a variety of sources to start a new incubator. And the focus of the entrepreneurs that will be in that incubator are people who are solving problems that are experienced by underserved communities in New York City. And getting those companies up and running and getting those solutions out in the market. And so I think those are 2 examples of really important initiatives, but you are seeing this. So for example, the Wildlife Conservation Society in the Bronx actually runs a program called Sci NYC, which is the largest workforce development program in the city right now. And it's in all of the major boroughs. Nobody knows about it. And so focusing a light on these kinds of initiatives, I think, is going to really what is going to accelerate this. But there's no question that's the next big push in New York.
Yes.
I'm Gloria from PA Consulting. I mean, since 2018, there has been a lot of investments into the life sciences space with COVID as well. There's a lot of money that was into VCs, and people with half an idea are getting startups and a lot of funding, right? Do you see this going ahead? Because the last 2 years has been quite difficult for the biotech sector. And I work in the cell and gene therapy space, which has seen quite a lot of layoffs and a lot of downsizing in the last couple of years. Are we seeing the same trajectory going forward?
So first of all, life science is driven by fundamentals of human health. And when you have an aging population worldwide that has chronic conditions that need to be treated, and there, new therapies that need to be developed to prevent that from happening in the next generation, the fundamentals are there, and the the pace of technological change is accelerating more and more. So that hasn't changed at all. Life sciences is also a cyclical industry, so you go through these booms and busts occasionally, primarily driven by investment euphoria when there is, a flavor of the month technology that comes out and all of the VCs pour money into it, and then they have to retrench when the technology doesn't turn out or isn't evolving as fast as they would have liked, or the clinical trials aren't working out. And I think in the pandemic, you saw this euphoric investment, this huge amount, like groundbreaking investment that went in to a lot of companies that wouldn't have gotten funded before. So you had companies that didn't even have data that was clinically relevant going for IPOs, and then they ran out of money. Small wonder. And now they're in trouble, and it's taken a couple of years to sort itself out. The other thing is, the interest rates are affecting capital available. And as those come down, because inflation is tamed, I think you're going to see, and even this year in 2024, you've seen some successful IPOs, so that's changing.
Can we get Robert's view on that as well, in terms of what you're seeing in the UK?
Yeah, no, I think Nancy said it very well. It's exactly the same. I mean, I feel this because I'm involved in two companies. One is well funded and is fairly secure. The other one is on life support and fragile. And so we watch very carefully what's happening in the markets, and we get very good advice from global players. So I think it's going to have a resurgence, but then there'll be another bust. I mean, it's just the way it goes. Could I just comment on the health inequality thing again? Because I really think that's so important. I feel very strongly about it. I think there are two, with SC1, the cluster that I'm directly involved with, the two ways in which I believe will address health inequalities, which are extreme. I mean, in one of the London boroughs that sit where we sit, the life expectancy differs by 10 years as to whether you're in the south or the north of the borough. I mean, what's that about? That's indefensible. So I think two ways that this will help. One is just economic regeneration. I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean, it's happening in New York, it's happening here. We need more of it. The other is employment and skills training for kids. So a lot of kids born in some of these depressed areas have very low expectations. So they don't believe they could become a doctor, or they could become a scientist, or become a pharmacist, or become a estates manager in one of these big organizations. But of course they could. So I think we're doing a lot of outreach now, going into schools, talking up the opportunity. We're a huge employer in aggregate. And so the employment opportunities are fabulous for these kids. And so we want to improve life chances for school leavers.
Thank you. Last question goes to Rupert.
Oh, thank you very much. Look, there are some amazing schemes coming forward in New York, and ground up developments that may or may not come to fruition. But I was just thinking, given the sort of return to office in New York may not have been so strong as UK, have there been any more engagement from landlords within existing buildings that have come to you looking to repurpose and regenerate existing buildings that may have seen their time in terms of offices or other use classes?
Absolutely. So a lot of the developments that you saw there were repurposed buildings. So Hudson Research Center, 125 West End Labs used to be a car dealership. Inna Labs was a commercialization repurpose. The Hatch, which is Longfellow in Long Island City, and everything in Manhattan Factory District. The Tasty is ground up, but the Mink building, and I forget what the other building in that location is called, but those two are both repurposed. And yes, so a lot of building owners are looking at what they can do. And of course, not every building lends itself to life sciences, just because there's such differences between office and life science use in terms of mechanical systems and other building characteristics that you need to have be successful. But, yeah.
Right, I think it's time to thank the panel for the wonderful discussion we've had. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Thank you all very much for coming. Fascinating discussion. Lots of food, positive food for thought, I think, and hopefully an opportunity over a glass of wine to continue the discussion. So really just, to reiterate, Ryan, thank you to Ryan, to Andy, to Robert, and to Nancy. Thank you very much indeed.
Or now actually.
How are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, mate.
Readjusting.
Yeah, a couple of these.
Well, I saw